It's almost time for Formula One to head back across the Atlantic for the Canadian Grand Prix at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal for round 9 of the 2024 Formula One World Championship. And as there's a lot going on in Formula One at the moment, we're also going to talk about Ocon and Alpine, a return for Briatore, Sergio and Yuki and Antonelli as well, and Liberty Media's Greg Maffei. But back to Montreal. The track at Ile Notre Dame has always been a favourite amongst fans and drivers alike, with its high speeds, heavy braking and fast changes of direction. The perfect antidote to the pedestrian Monaco Grand Prix. Speaking of Monaco though, here's how the championship standings look after that race. And we can see that Max Verstappen leads the way, but the gap is coming down. He's ahead of Charles Leclerc in second. Then it is in third place now, Lando Norris. He's jumped up ahead of Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz in fifth on equal points. Then a bit of a jump, isn't it, really, after that, down to Oscar Piastri, then George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. Yuki Tsunoda is making his way up the order a little bit now on 19 points, but further afield there's still a number of teams yet to score. When we look at the constructors, well, Red Bull lead the way, but that gap is coming down. Just 24 points now between them and Ferrari, and the gap between Ferrari and McLaren, well, that is also closing up. Mercedes just hanging on to the coattails of those two, and Aston Martin falling away. Okay, well, let's get straight into the Canadian Grand Prix then, shall we? And all the news ahead of it. And joining me to talk through everything Formula One relating to this Grand Prix, I've got John Noble and Jake Boxall-Legge, aka JBL. First of all, JBL, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Just as you catch me, Wednesday I'm going to Canada, so looking forward to that. It was very fun last year. Weather was a little bit miserable here and there, but as we all know, that's usually quite good when it comes to F1, so hopefully a little bit more of that, please.
Now, what about you, John? I read an article you'd written that you were one of the few people that enjoyed the Monaco Grand Prix. So how are you doing?
Yeah, I think I must be in the minority of, I think it's the rest of the world v me, basically, because I don't think many people did. But I love, I think races have got loads of different aspects to get into. And Monaco, you don't go and watch Monaco for overtaking and wheel-to-wheel battles. You go for strategy and undercuts and the potential for jeopardy. And there was enough potential in that race up until a certain point that floated my boat. So there we go. I couldn't have it 24 times a year, but as a one-off, I'll take it.
Yeah, your boat that you've got parked outside in your garden that you claimed earlier on that none of us believe at all. And then let's stick with Monaco for a second, actually, because there's news that's come out that Esteban Ocon is going to be leaving Alpine at the end of this season. Now, do we think this is directly related to what happened at Monaco when he overtook his teammate and ended up, not moving up the order as he would have hoped, John?
From what I understand, Monaco was a factor in this decision, but was not the factor in this decision. I think that Monaco wasn't necessarily kind of the one-off moment that suddenly brought everything to a head. There's been issues bubbling away all season. It's widely known Esteban and Pierre Gasly aren't the best of mates, but I think they've tolerated each other and worked as they needed to. But I think there's been a few little warning signs. Miami, for example, they battled wheel to wheel through that kind of sequence towards the end of the lap, and I think it was more by luck than judgment that there wasn't a collision then. And I think the team management just feel that at a time when they need everything working together, it's going to be days of good fortune when they score points. They cannot afford to have both cars out on the day potentially when points can open up. They need everything working together, and I think they felt that things aren't just not working, basically, not working the direction they wanted. And performance-wise, I think, irrespective of these incidents, I think Esteban was likely to leave anyway. I think he's got the Haas are interested in him. From what I understand, Audi, Sauber, whatever you want to call it, if Carlos Sainz doesn't take that deal, then he was kind of next in line for that. So I think there are options out there. It's happened. They're taking different futures, and we'll see how they rock on for the rest of the year.
He's been quite vocal, hasn't he, on social media, though, recently, and there's been quite a lot of articles written about Esteban Ocon saying he feels he's been wronged and that people are misjudging him and are coming up with their own conclusions. JBL, do you think that he's been wronged, or do you think we're right to have a certain opinion on Esteban Ocon?
I think this is a difficult question to answer, given that I wrote one of said articles about the reputation that currently exists about him not being a particularly good team player. But I genuinely believe there's truth to it, and I think the Esteban doth protest too much, unfortunately. There have been incidents throughout his Formula One career which suggests that, he's not above putting himself before the team. It's just unfortunately the way it's been, and I'm sure that he probably disagrees with that. I think his social media statement suggests so. But ultimately, it's going to follow him around unless he does something drastic. And ultimately as well, you have this... it was a risk to put Gasly and Ocon together. I think it's very, very clear that it hasn't worked. They don't get on. They did say that they'd bury the hatchet, but there just seems to be this undercurrent of, I don't know, an atmosphere that's not particularly conducive to bringing out the best of a team. And I think, it just made sense to kind of cut their losses, part ways with Ocon after, all of the things that John has mentioned, and kind of start again a little bit. I think it doesn't make sense. You can go forward with two drivers that don't like each other particularly, but it very rarely works. It's not good for team harmony at all. You need two drivers that are gonna work together really when you're in that position.
But where can he go? I mean, if this reputation is preceding him now, where is Ocon likely to end up? Because there's quite a lot of teams available with seats available, but there's a lot of drivers waiting to fill those seats, and it looks like we're going to lose at least two current drivers anyway from the crop, with maybe some rookies coming in for 2025. John, have you got any ideas of where he might go? You've been talking about who might fill his seat as well.
So as I said before, I think Haas are clearly interested. I think Oliver Behrman's a shoe-in there. I think he's impressed enough. Ferrari are pushing on, promising rookie. I think he's kind of 9/10 of the way there to a Haas seat for next season. Sorry. I think Haas don't want two rookies. I think they've learned their lesson when they got bit with Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. So I think they know the value of an experienced hand there. I think there are some concerns about Kevin Magnussen in terms of kind of consistency and just getting involved in stuff he shouldn't necessarily get involved in. And I think Ocon comes with race-winning pedigree, decent experience, obviously, very good junior single-seater record. So it kind of ticks all the boxes for Haas on that front. Potentially the Sauber Audi thing, pending what Sainz does. Sainz obviously has this offer from Williams that's could be quite attractive. From what I understand, Ocon's not on the Williams shortlist. James Vowles, I think his focus is either Sainz or Bottas for next season. So I think one of those two is a probable contender. So I think Ocon won't have too much trouble finding a seat for next season. And in terms of who goes to Alpine, Jack Doohan, I think has been evaluated. I think there's a chance he could get some FP1 run-ins as soon as this weekend's race in Canada. Obviously Mick Schumacher's been mentioned, but not really. I think he'd need to impress an awful lot for Alpine to commit to him for another full season of F1. And I think Guan Yu Zhou as well needs to be a contender. Former Renault kind of driver academy, comes a bit of Chinese backing, and I think there's some potentially some growing Chinese influence within the Renault group as well. So maybe he ticks more boxes for Alpine. But I think the priority for Alpine is finding a teammate that Pierre Gasly, who's set to get a new deal, gets on well with.
Well, as always with the driver merry-go-round, we're going to find out over the next few weeks and months, I'm sure. Now, JBL, there was somebody that was spotted at Monaco that's got tongues wagging. That was Flavio Briatore was seen there. Now, there's rumours aplenty that he's heading towards Alpine in some consultancy sort of role. What do you make of this?
It's certainly an interesting little, I guess, side plot to whatever on earth is going on at Alpine. It's odd because basically the suggestions are about his involvement seem to kind of vary. Is he there to kind of help investors into the team? Is he there to kind of wield some degree of hatchet with regards to recruits to the team? Or is it potentially, helping sort of grease the path for a sale or something like that? It's sort of very up in the air at the moment. It's weird because he's been through, I would say, 3 very distinct phases of the team, Briatore. He was there at the start. He was brought on board in 1988 by Benetton to kind of turn the team around and basically crack some heads together, and obviously that yielded 2 title wins. And then he was there with the Renault successes with Fernando Alonso, and then exiled after the Crashgate scandal. So it's interesting that he's sort of found a way back, a life raft back into kind of F1 after so many years of being banned from the championship entirely. What role is that in? I think that's the question. And is it an official one? Whether it is to find more investors, more partners. It's already sort of got quite a burgeoning group of investors, like, you know, the group with Anthony Joshua, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Ryan Reynolds, of that ilk. It does sort of suggest that Renault is willing to, I guess, lose its sphere of influence a little bit more and kind of step away a little bit from the team. Would it go for a full sale? Would it sell to, as John mentioned, Chinese investors already? Would it turn its team over to Geely or somebody? Would it eventually give Andretti away into Formula One? It's everything I've said here is purely speculative, but it just sort of suggests the mystery around his involvement.
Well, I'll tell you what, there was somebody else out there that's got a life raft, and that is Sergio Perez. There are rumours that he and Yuki Tsunoda are close to signing extensions to their contracts at Red Bull and RB respectively. What do you make of that, John?
Yeah, from what I understand, likely to come before this weekend, but I think the slightly movable targets. I think the Mexican general election has had a bit of an influence on when the Mexican side of that deal wants to go public. I mean, Perez staying on board in some respects really boring for us, because, you know, if a team's dominant, then you want the second driver to be battling there wheel to wheel, fighting, you know, these kind of the rivalries that we love, like, you know, Senna Prost, Rosberg Hamilton, Webber Vettel, for example, you know, proper head to head, give us something to go against. And there's not really been that rivalry between Verstappen and Perez, apart from, you know, 2 or 3 races over 2 or 3 years, unfortunately. But from Red Bull's perspective, unfortunately, it makes sense. It doesn't cause trouble in the team, keeps Max happy. Max isn't under threat, doesn't want to kind of walk out because his teammates stirring things up and pulling the rug from underneath him. He did enough last year to help them get the Constructors' Championship, and they'll hope he can turn things around again this season. I think, you know, there are other options out there that could potentially be quicker than Checo. There are other options out there that could be quicker and cause more trouble. But Red Bull just want, not necessarily an easy life, but they just want the line of least resistance, shall we put it? And right now, that's Sergio Perez.
JBO, is it a good decision though? Because the Constructors' Championship is getting closer and closer by the race, it seems, at the moment, and it's not the first time that we've looked at Sergio Perez and said, well, his inability to score the big points have cost Red Bull Constructors' Championships, i.e. Constructors' Championship in the past. So do you think it's the right decision to keep him on for another year, if that's what happens?
I think for all of the reasons John's mentioned, it does make a lot of sense to do it, but equally it is true that if he continues with his vein of form as it is, if he continues with inconsistency, as the number 2 driver, he should be finishing second every time Max wins. Every time Max doesn't win, he should be the one picking up the pieces. And quite simply, he's not doing that. He's not doing that in a way that, let's say, Rubens Barrichello or Valtteri Bottas used to. And as the field does close up, he is going to ultimately, if he continues to do what he's doing, be a threat to Red Bull. So I think it has made sense for him to be in that role for the past few seasons. I do not believe going forward, if Red Bull maintains its superiority, he will continue to be the best person in that role. I think as much as it would cause internal strife with Max Verstappen, let's say, if Red Bull genuinely wanted to cement Constructors' Championships, Carlos Sainz would be clearly the best option for that car. Unfortunately, that's just not the way it's looking at it. I say unfortunately, in terms of a championship battle between drivers, yeah, unfortunately, but fortunately for Red Bull, it has enough of an edge at the moment to keep Perez on. I don't believe that will continue to be the case, though.
What about Yuki Tsunoda? I mean, here's a guy who's doing really well this season. He looks very, very competent and confident inside that RB, and presumably was looking for some progression in his Formula One career, John. So to say, okay, we'll give you a contract extension at RB, Is that the right move for him? Is it the right move for RB? It probably is more the right move for RB than it is for Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah, I mean, great news for RB, and I think however much Yuki would want a Red Bull seat, equally, it's can be a poison chalice at times getting promoted to Red Bull alongside Verstappen. You look at Monaco, for example. Checo's out of qualifying. I think it was 2 or 3 tenths behind Max, which in F1 terms, in old days would have been the difference between first on the grid and second on the grid. But this is now the difference between getting through to Q3 and getting knocked out of Q1. So there are these tiny performance factors, and I think we sometimes underestimate the influence that Max Verstappen is having at Red Bull. So I think there have been times, you look at Imola qualifying, for example, I think that was a Max Verstappen pole as opposed to a Red Bull pole. I think he lifted the car that day to make the difference. So I think Red Bull know far more the influence factor of, where is Max and what is realistic for a second driver. And I think if you throw someone like Yuki in a Red Bull, huge expectation and pressure on him to deliver, and he doesn't deliver, he's crushed by halfway through the year, career over. So in some senses, Red Bull seat would be great, but do you really, as a young driver, want to be going up against Max Verstappen at his peak?
I'd give it a go. I wouldn't do very well.
Have you phoned Christian Horner up?
Yeah, he's not answering. He's not. He seems to claim that he doesn't know who I am, which is just absurd, right? but what about Daniel Ricciardo though, JBL? Because I've read articles about him saying he's concentrating on not whether he's going to get a new contract or where he's going to go, but on getting the results out of the car and results for him. But he'll be potentially a bit disappointed by the news that the seat at Red Bull will have gone.
I mean, that's kind of what he was brought in to try and take, wasn't it? To put that pressure on Perez. And last year there were moments where he looked like he would be that driver. That drive to fourth on the grid at Mexico, that was sixth in the race, and a few before his hand fracture at Zandvoort. There were moments where he looked genuinely like he'd rediscovered his mojo. But this year, it's looking more and more tenuous, let's say. Tsunoda has clearly been the better driver of the two. If you're going to promote a driver to Red Bull, you would pick the top one of those two. You wouldn't pick somebody that you're kind of betting all your chips on and hoping will regain past glories. That's not the way it should be. So Ricciardo has work to do to get back on top of where he's missing time to Tsunoda, and I think there's a few areas that he needs to work on. Obviously, qualifying is the big one, just getting that car balanced, because he loses a lot on a Saturday, which costs him for Sundays. So yeah, I think that should be where his main focus is, and then if those results improve, then an RB seat will the continuation of his RB seat, will follow. But I think he'll be disappointed he hasn't shown the pace that is required for Red Bull. Just on Tsunoda as well, from my point of view, I think Red Bull, it would be taking a risk to sign him, but I think it would be a sort of calculated risk, and I genuinely believe that he'd do a good job there. But the thing is, I think Tsunoda has been so effective at RB is because he's comfortable and he's kind of grown into the team. He's spent a few years there. They've helped him become a better driver, a slightly calmer driver as well. I think, telling him to put a euro in the swear jar every time he swears on the radio, that's kind of helped a little bit. But yeah, he's comfortable in that environment. They let him be him, and that's why he's doing so well. And I don't believe that Red Bull would necessarily offer that environment for him, unfortunately.
Well, let's stay on seats for a second, John, and Mick Schumacher and Kimi Antonelli are going to be testing this week in Barcelona. Is this all pointing, do you think, to Kimi Antonelli racing in a Mercedes in 2025? Is that what the assumptions are?
Yeah, I think that's been the assumption since the start of the season, beyond the unpredictability of the Max Verstappen factor. From what I understand, Toto has been crystal clear that Kimi Antonelli is a star of the future. And I think 2025, with the 26 rules coming up, and Mercedes not in a position to be fighting for world championships at the moment, it's the perfect time to bring a rookie up. I think he feels that he kind of missed an opportunity with Max Verstappen when there was a chance to get him on board, and Red Bull grabbed him and dumped him at Toro Rosso. They doesn't want that to happen again. So I think everything's pointing towards Antonelli doing it. They've ramped up the F1 testing program. Mercedes have been at pains to kind of play down talk. These are shootout tests where he's going up against Mick. There was a test recently at Silverstone. I think it was over 2 or 3 days with Mick and George Russell, and people were making up stories about, Kimi did times quicker than George Russell and all that sort of thing, which I'm told isn't correct because, different days, different tyres, different fuel loads. It's all kind of impossibles. But I think Antonelli's times are respectable. He's impressing the team. They want to see some progress. And it keeps rolling on. I think if I was going to have to put some money down on who's going to be George Russell's teammate at Mercedes next year, I think I'd put it on Kimi Antonelli.
Well, and I like the fact you said it with a sort of a Sean Connery accent as well there when you said his name. It was quite like that. It was very nice. Now, you've been featuring, we love your voice, obviously, John, and we love hearing you on podcasts as well, but you seem to be podcasting out recently. You're on the James Allen on F1 podcast, which is coming out this week, which featured an exclusive interview with the Liberty Media CEO, Greg Maffei. What can you say? Is there any juicy bits that you can tell us about what you said and what you heard?
Yeah, it was kind of a state of the nation overview piece, basically. So no kind of dramatic news stories in terms of we're going to get rid of sprint races or change the calendar or rip up the format. A lot of kind of the themes we've talked about. The next new races will be in Asia, 24 races maximum. He talked a bit. It's quite interesting. He talks primarily about how lucky he felt Liberty were in some respects when they came in. That F1 have been so underutilised on social media and digital platforms that Bernie's old model had been, protect absolutely everything in the paddock, don't let any moving images get out, nothing on social media, because he felt that would damage the business model of TV companies, and they just opened the doors, and then that's led to the transformation, this arrival of new fans, which is quite interesting. But he also talks about you can't be a mistake for Liberty to get complacent, despite the massive growth. And interestingly, also some concerns that if single driver dominance continues, could that be, the biggest negative kind of hanging over Formula One? So he addresses that. And then longer term, also quite interesting, he talks more about Liberty's push, more kind of direct to consumer as a F1 business model. So rather than, fans spending money on Sky and you get your subscription from Sky to watch TV, in the end, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we don't know, but maybe we'll all be subscribing to F1 TV and watching TV direct through them, paying them via our phone or tablets or TVs. So I think they're looking more at that. And you notice that more, that they're pushing more on their YouTube channels and TikTok and Instagram with moving content, which is an interesting thing and something that Bernie would never have done, because he would have said, right, absolutely none of this at all.
It's enough to make his hair turn white, isn't it? If it hadn't already. Look, John, thanks very much. Make sure you check out that James Allen on F1 podcast. It's out this week and it features our very own John, among other people as well. Should we turn our attention to Canada then? We might as well. It's all about Canada this episode, isn't it? So, Canadian Grand Prix, what do we reckon, JBL? Are Ferrari going to continue where they left off in Monaco and at the sharp end?
I think it would be a little bit harder to do that. This year's Ferrari is very, very compliant on curbs and bumps, and that's something that Montreal has in spades. So you would expect some degree of form to continue over, but it is a very different circuit. You're not using high downforce packages. You're trying to get a little bit more top speed on the straights. So you're going to trim a little bit of downforce out. So it's finding that balance between where you are on those curbs and riding them properly and getting lap time out that way, and having the acceleration, the top speed to make the most of the longest, especially the back straight, going down towards the pit lane. So I think there's a lot of variables here. I don't think it's going to be quite as straightforward as kind of Monaco was, let's say. And all of the top three teams do have their own strengths and weaknesses, and I don't think it's as straightforward as Ferrari having a similar car to Monaco, so it'll be fine. Red Bull are going to struggle, and McLaren also be somewhere in the middle. I don't believe that. I think they've all got their own strengths and weaknesses here. So I think, honestly, it could be a fascinating battle between all three of them.
Well, let's stay with the team you mentioned just then, Red Bull, John. They did struggle with the curbs. Montreal's got pretty savage curves and curbs and pretty rough, abrasive surface as well. So is it likely to be another problematic weekend for Red Bull?
It's interesting. First of all, the old bumps issue at Montreal may not be as problematic. I think the track's been resurfaced, so it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the surface in terms of bumps. But equally, does it trigger problems like we saw in China, or even Melbourne with graining and kind of a different type of tyre problem that Red Bull could potentially struggle with? I think what will be interesting is, we don't have the answers as to why Red Bull struggled so much at Monaco, but we're piecing together the clues, and it looks more and more like that they've pushed so hard aggressively to maximise their aero platform that it's given them limits in terms of mechanical flexibility. So when they need to raise the car up for bumps or for curbs, it kind of compromises their aero performance, and they kind of find themselves trapped in this narrow window, which may explain why Imola Friday was so difficult when they initially started far too low for the track and had to kind of back their way out of it. And Monaco, where they're obviously hemmed in quite a bit by this kind of inability to do mechanically what they want to do because of the aero compromises. So it'll be interesting to see how that balances out in Montreal. Will they find a way to kind of better deal with these two kind of conflicting needs at some points? But I think it'll be quite indicative of the season ahead that if Red Bull are again a little bit on the back foot here, I think we'll have a clear indication of the races they will struggle at. Because I'm absolutely convinced we're going to go to Barcelona in 2 weeks' time on a flat, high aero demand track with rear degradation, rear limited, and Verstappen's you can wave him goodbye at turn 1 and he's going to be gone.
And what about McLaren then, JBL? Because they're in a bit of a rich vein of form. I read an article, it might have been you that wrote it actually, it might have been John as well, so I apologise for which one of you didn't write the article or did write the article. But it was about Seidel saying that, Stella saying that they were surprised by the performance and they need to understand why they're getting better performance out of the car than they were expecting. But is this just a blip in a positive for McLaren, or are they going to carry on being where they've been?
I think they'll carry on being where they've been, to be honest with you. And the thing is, they like to manage their expectations quite well. There's been a lot of discussion in the last few races about, from Lando Norris, he's saying, he's a glass half full person, where I think he's completely misunderstood the maxim there. He's a glass half empty man. He's always forever playing down expectations, and Stella's sort of been doing the same, although not to quite the same extent. But I think they should be up there. They do have very clear strengths. It's not as, it's not like last year where we were looking at their top speed performance and they're about 10, 15 kilometres an hour down. They're not that sort of far off as like they were at the start of last year. The car is becoming a little bit easier to handle for the drivers. There's tacking on more downforce. It just seems to be all culminating in a very sort of good all-round package. So when you look at that, I think it's hard to kind of play McLaren down. They will be a factor this weekend. Whether they'll be in, contention for victory, I think it might be a little bit of a stretch, but we probably thought the same about that in Miami as well. So they do have a very good chance this weekend, and I think, discount them at your peril. I think that there were moments in qualifying last year that Piastri looked very, very good until he shunted it. So with a better car this year, they should be up there.
It's funny, isn't it? At the start of the season, we were looking at the battle for second or the battle for third, that kind of position. There seems to be now a real battle for first, John, and with Ferrari only 24 points behind Red Bull. Are we seeing a swing that you expect to continue through the 2024 season, through Montreal and beyond? Or is it that Red Bull will pick up the pieces and start to extend that lead again?
I'm sure. I think we've had a run of races where the Red Bull weaknesses have been exposed. You talk about the Miami, the Miami slow speed, bumpy, especially the chicane section. And then Max's race was compromised when he ran over the bollard and wrecked the floor. But they're a team, they're more under pressure now than they were at the start of the season. I think that's fair. And when you're under pressure, you make mistakes with setup, you can make mistakes with strategy, and drivers can make mistakes. So I think that's an element that will remain. I think the days of them cruising are gone, apart from, as I say, tracks that are absolutely perfect for the Red Bull, like Barcelona. I think if Barcelona went back to the old layout with the fiddly little chicane at the end, then it would be a different factor, but it's almost perfect circuit for Red Bull. So there can be days still where Red Bull are gone, but equally, I think the opportunities are there for Ferrari and McLaren, and then it will be a case of having two teams there. Does it benefit Red Bull because McLaren and Ferrari are taking points off each other, or does it hurt them because the weekends that Red Bull are off the pace, they're finishing 4th and 5th, not 2nd and 3rd, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense. But I read an article, again, one of your articles, about Fred Vasseur saying that the advances they can now make are getting narrower and narrower because those percentage gains are harder to find, JBL. What's the reason that you've identified, or that you can tell us, that you think is the reason behind Red Bull being caught by the others seems to be so progressively?
It's the law of diminishing returns, isn't it? I think you see it in every single industry. The more progress you make, the closer and closer you kind of get to iterating and coming up with similar products. I think we kind of saw that. Let's say mobile phones as an example. When the iPhone came out, it was a huge moment, and then everybody else ended up doing the same thing. And I think everybody has a phone in their pocket of a similar performance point. I'm sure there'll be someone on the internet to tell me I'm wrong, but I think we're getting to that point now where all of the cars are sort of getting very similar. Everybody's trying to sort of do similar things with the floor because they've kind of sussed it out. So they're all exploiting the same boundaries, the same limitations. Obviously, Red Bull got to the kind of edges of the envelope, if you will, first, but all of the teams are getting there. They're finding them, and in some cases, finding areas that Red Bull hadn't exploited. So I think that's the key, sort of the crux of it. They're all following on from what the top team did, watching what they're doing, understanding, let's say, how their floor works and that kind of thing. But they're adding their own twists and their own little niches onto it, finding performance where Red Bull couldn't do, as we've already mentioned, kind of slow speed and the bumpier kind of characteristic tracks. So that's where it's just a natural progression. The longer you have a static rule set, the easier it is for teams to converge. So I think we had that in 2021 where we had, after years of Mercedes dominance, we suddenly had a championship battle. It sort of led us to think, is 2022 such a good idea? Because we've suddenly got this really close pack. McLaren was winning races. Ferrari was still getting over a really horrible year. You had a couple of other teams all really performing really well. And suddenly then you go to a new rule set and it blows wide open. It'll be the same in 2026. We'll think after 2025, we'll think, is it such a good idea to switch? But it always converges. It always does.
Yeah, I mean, it's looking like 2025 is going to be a very spicy year already. But what about a couple of other teams then that we've not really mentioned? John, are we expecting anything from Mercedes and Aston Martin? It seems like Aston Martin need to pull their socks up because it's falling away from them quite alarmingly.
Yeah, Aston Martin, I think, is a team that needs some rapid answers to what's happening. They seem to have, they've kind of started the season in this no man's land of fifth. They seemed a bit of drift of the top four teams, but clear of kind of RB Haas behind. Then they had this phase where some improvements lifted them back into this pack, and now they've brought their latest upgrades on. They appear to have dropped away again. So I think the key thing to understand is it a repeat of last year where they brought upgrades to the car, they delivered theoretical benefits, but actually on track it was much harder to quantify. Mike Crack's already talked about these upgrades that came at Imola, made the car more difficult to drive, and it could be almost an inverse of what McLaren have found with their upgrades, that they bought kind of they knew from the simulator and simulation tools that it would bring a certain benefit of downforce, but the actual gain on track is bigger because the drivers get more confidence. There's a level of confidence that simulators aren't programmed to deal with, and if the driver's confident, he can brake later, corner quicker, get on the throttle earlier, all those sort of things. So the gain there is bigger, whereas maybe Aston's worse off that it's not taken into account the fact the car's more difficult to drive and they lose time through this. So I think there's some big kind of analysis now going on inside Aston Martin to sort it out. And then Mercedes, they've talked, I think Andrew Shovlin has given this great analogy of it's a car that's been either quick in high speed or quick in low speed. What they haven't managed to do is piece this together, and Andrew Shovlin described it as having too small a duvet. So Mercedes can either cover its toes up nice and warmly or kind of cover its body and head, but it can't do both. And this is about making its duvet larger, basically. So these changes we saw with George Russell's front wing in Monaco, more bits coming for Canada. It's just about increasing that envelope, making the duvet bigger, and hopefully the car performs better at a larger variety of corners. That's their target and focus. No magic bullet. Stretch this duvet a little bit, and hopefully the lap time comes from that.
Yeah, I read that Toto Wolff quite enjoys these analogies, doesn't he? You might need a big duvet, actually, because in Canada, the weather can be quite changeable, can't it? No, it's a lovely link, this one, isn't it? Hey, what do we think about the changeable weather? Such a pro, writes itself. What do we think about the changeable weather and the chances of a safety car and the track itself? It can really, if anybody makes a mistake, it can really jump on them. So I guess teams in the midfield are looking at this as a really big opportunity to take advantage if there's an advantage that can be grabbed at any stage, JBL.
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to continue the duvet analogy, which would be a shame because I have nothing to add. I don't know how I can conflate two ideas. But what we do have is if you look at the weather radar anyway, there's the potential for a little bit of rain. It looks like it's going to be sort of changeable, especially throughout Sunday as well. It seems that just by going kind of through the weather radars cursorily now, it'll obviously all change by Sunday and it will be sunny. But it should be that we have a little bit of rain pre-race. Start of the race should be sort of held in dry conditions, and then by the end of the race it might get a little bit rainy, but that's just only preliminary at this moment. But throughout the weekend there should be rain, according to weather trackers. So that's gonna change a little bit for practice with regards to how the team's set up, how they prepare, how they're able to look at these new parts that they're bringing to the race. And in qualifying as well, we had a rain affected qualifying last year, and it really spiced things up. And if it weren't for a penalty, Nico Hülkenberg would have been second on the grid. So it can do all sorts. Rain, it's the great leveler. So hopefully it comes. It's not just wet. I hope it's not just wet, and I hope I get to explore Montreal and do so in the dry. But equally, a few pepperings here and there should spice it up nicely.
Don't take a duvet out in the rain. It will just get heavy and it will not be nice at all. Let's talk tyres very quickly then. They're taking the softer of all the compounds, the C3 to the C5. Let's say it's a dry race throughout. Are we expecting a one-stopper or a two-stopper, John?
I think it depends what this track surface is like. It's the great unknown with track surfaces, because sometimes there can be a ton of grip. And sometimes there's no grip. Sometimes there's tons of graining. Sometimes there's tons of marbles. Sometimes the tyres fall apart on them. I think this is the unpredictability. I think it probably leans more towards a two-stop just because overtaking's more possible. And the pit stop here loss isn't as kind of dramatic as it has been at Imola and Monaco, because if it takes 28 seconds to change tyres, it's much easier to say, we can save that by backing off and driving slowly. So I think it's traditionally more of an attacking race, but equally one of safety cars, VSCs, a bit more chaos on that front, which often encourages people to roll the dice a bit more.
We know that JBL wants dry weather for sightseeing, wet and dry for the race. What do you reckon? What would you be looking for though, John?
I don't care what the weather's like. I just want a good race and that little jeopardy factor that's thrown in that builds it up to a fantastic finish. Simple man I am.
Very simple indeed. Now, before you both disappear, quick bizarre Bryn prediction time. So I want you to give me the top three, each of you, and then I'm going to ask you to predict something else a bit more random. So JBL, top three?
Verstappen, Leclerc, Piastri.
Okay, John?
I might go... I might go Norris, Piastri, Leclerc.
Norris for win number 2.
Yeah.
How about that? Now, what about a random one? Okay, JBL, where's Tsunoda going to finish?
9th. I reckon he'll get points, but not a lot.
9th, says JBL. John?
I'm going to go be different. I'm going to go 10th.
Wow, radically different. Thank you. There you go. Gosh, wow.
Putting his neck
Hot
on the
off
line.
Press. You can't wait. The audience can't wait for this. Look, thank you very much indeed, as always, gents. We shall catch up post-race. Enjoy your time out there, though, won't you, JBL? Don't forget to take your duvet.
Will do. I'll bring you back some maple syrup, I guess.
He's done his research, John. He's done his research. Thanks as well to you, John. We'll catch you next time.
See you later.
Well, that just about does it for our look ahead at the Canadian Grand Prix. Thanks very much to JBL and to John as always. And don't forget to like and subscribe and keep your comments coming in as well. We'll see you next time, but as always, thanks for watching.